All right, well, welcome everybody to another edition of Garden Hour. My name is Amanda Bachman. I'll be your host this evening. I'm the Pesticide Education and Urban Entomology Field Specialist here in Pierre, South Dakota. It is a little bit cloudy outside. We had a couple raindrops, but I think my car will be safe from hail this time. So fingers crossed. And joining me tonight, we've got Claudia, who, since you used my Zoom invite, my name is now your name on Zoom, so you might want to go in and rename yourself. But Claudia, she's our nutrition field specialist. What are you going to be talking about tonight?
I am going to be talking about some food preservation stuff. So
awesome. Yeah, gardens are sort of ramping up in production, and it's always good to know what to do with those things. And I'm going to be going over just a couple sort of cool insects that I've been sort of getting questions about. And it's just the two of us tonight. So we've got insects covered, we've got food preservation covered. So for those of you who maybe submitted some more horticulture related questions ahead of time, I am going to have to punt those until next week. I got a very interesting one about an albino cucumber, and Christine or Rhoda is going to have to catch that one next week because I am not qualified to talk about why your cucumber has been attacked by Vanicula. So I will turn it over to Claudia to get us started.
Sounds good. All right. Are we good?
Yes, I can see your slides. Looks great.
Okay, perfect. So tonight I'm just going to go over I'll just kind of run through a little bit of canning information, and then I'm just going to go over a few bumper crops, which, are just some of those foods you also get and you have a million of them and you just try to get rid of them. You're ditching them on your neighbors. You're dropping them off at your family members' houses just because you have so much of it and you don't know what to do with it. So I'll just go over some ways you can utilize those foods. And yeah, I'm here for any of your canning questions. So to start off, just kind of gonna go over quickly water bath canning and pressure canning and why we do one over the other. So water bath canning we get to use for high acid foods. So your high acid foods would be mostly all fruits, your acidified foods, so that would be like salsas, spaghetti sauces, pickles, sauerkraut, and all of those foods. And pressure canning you use for lower acid foods, which would be like most of your vegetables, meats, fish, poultry, and then soups and stews. And the difference between the acids is what temperatures the food needs to reach. So in a water bath canner, you can use high acid foods because the acid helps kill certain pathogens, specifically Clostridium botulinum, and it doesn't need to be heated to as high of temperature. So water bath canning gets you to boiling point, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit, but also you will have to adjust for altitude, which that's kind of a whole nother story. But if you guys have questions, please let me know. And then for pressure canners, you do low acid foods in there because they don't have like the assistance like the high acid foods from the acid to kill off all those pathogens. So pressure canners can get the food, well, I guess the temperature in the canner up to 240 degrees Fahrenheit. So it just kind of helps give another punch to that Clostridium botulinum to make sure that it's not going to be present in your canned goods. All right, so on to our bumper crops. First, I have zucchini. Zucchini I love it. I just eat it all the time during this time of year. But sometimes all of a sudden you have like 50 zucchini and you're like, what the heck? What am I going to do with all these? Also, sometimes you have them where they're like the size of your leg because you check them one day and you're like, oh, I did a little bit more. And then all of a sudden they're just like ginormous. But so you can freeze zucchini, same as like any other summer squash. When you freeze it, you're going to want to slice it up. I usually slice it up into how I would want it in a meal. So either you can dice it or put it in like fry shape. And then you're going to blanch it. So you're just going to dip it in boiling water for say 3 minutes. pull it out, and then put it in some ice water to stop the cooking process. Because when we blanch, we're just doing like a pre-cook that helps the color kind of pop. And then when you freeze it, it helps maintain that color. You can also steam blanch, where you just lay the produce down on like a wire rack above boiling water. So then the steam is floating up and blanching it. And then again, you always want to put it back in that ice water to make sure it stops and it doesn't cook all the way. And then if you have a vacuum sealer, I'd use one of those because those are handy. But like me, I don't. So I just use plastic bags usually, fill them up, try and push all the air out and seal them, flatten them out, and you can stick them in your freezer. You can also can zucchini. When we can zucchini, we usually have to like acidify it. So you could do like pickled zucchini, or you can do like a zucchini relish, zucchini chutney. You usually have to mix it with stuff to acidify it. Otherwise, it's just a very low acid vegetable. So it's really hard to ensure that it's safe. And then for dehydrating, a lot of people do zucchini chips. So they'll slice them up, just in the hole, and then you want to blanch them before you dehydrate them because it helps bring out that color and help maintain its color while it's being dried. And it kind of just gives it a better product too. But then you can use a dehydrator or you can use an oven. Just kind of follow your manufacturer's instructions. Having an electric dehydrator is very handy because it kind of just tells you, okay, zucchini chips, dehydrate them for this long at this temperature, and then they're good. You can also add some seasonings onto the zucchini if you want to try and play with it a little bit. And then our next one is sweet corn. I also love sweet corn. Yeah, you can do so much with corn. But for freezing it, this is what we always do every year because my fiance, they have a feedlot, so they grow a ton of corn for their cattle, but they also reserve a little section so we can, I shouldn't say a little section, it's always a ton of sweet corn. But so we just spend one day where we go and pick it all, go home, shuck it, which for some reason that is like the one day I get the most fly bites is when we are standing there shucking all the corn. But then we toss it in a big turkey fryer and boil it, toss it into a cooler with some ice water, then we bring it in and cut the corn off the cob, or you can leave it on the cob and freeze it. But we cut it off, put it in some freezer bags, and then we put them on a cookie sheet and put them in the freezer just so they freeze level. And then once they're a little more solid, we stack them, just because it's not fun when you freeze food in a bag and then it freezes all kitty wampus like, and it looks ugly when it's stacked together. Just in this freezer picture I have on the screen, you can see one of those tomato bags is just, it doesn't lay right where all the corn lays right. So I don't know, I think a pretty freezer is a happy me. And then for canning corn, you can can corn just as is, but you will have to use a pressure canner since it is a low acid vegetable. If you don't have a pressure canner, you can acidify it so you can make a corn relish. That would work too. And then you could use a water bath canner. And then for dehydrating, you're going to kind of prepare it just like you would for freezing it. You'll want to blanch it. And then I'd probably cut it off the cob. It's not going to dry good if you put it on the cob. Probably won't even fit in a dehydrator if that's what you're using. But you can cut it off, lay it out and dehydrate it. And something you can use with dehydrated corn, you can make a lot of soups. Or if you like making, you can really add it to anything. The biggest one is soups. You can add it into pasta or some other dishes, chili, I guess. Yeah, you can kind of play with it once it's dried because it becomes very shelf stable. I think vegetables are good for about 6 months if they're dried properly. And then we have tomatoes. This is another one where all of a sudden you have tons. Like whenever I go home at the closer to the end of the tomato season, my uncle will have like 7 huge crates just completely full. And they are forcing them on people because they just get so many. And sometimes you can only can so much before you just get canned out. But so one thing you can do is freeze them. Again, you're going to want to blanch them. when you do freeze, you can freeze them with the skin on, but sometimes it gets a little tough. So I would blanch until they have that little split and then throw them back in some ice water so they can cool down. And then I'd remove that skin. And then depending on what you're going to use them for, sometimes you do want to remove the core, just whatever you prefer. And then you can put them in whole, you can freeze them in water, you can crush them so you have frozen crushed tomatoes. You can make them into a sauce and freeze them, whatever you'd like. Freezing it is very nice because you can kind of do whatever you want and freeze it, and it should stay good for at least 6 to 8 months. And then for canning it, you can do lots of stuff with tomatoes and canning. Tomatoes are one of these foods where we used to always only have to use a water bath canner, but they're slightly depending, like you can tell if you buy a tomato at a store, it doesn't have that much flavor. It's very watery, and they're actually kind of losing some of their acidity. So people have been saying you can, well, not people, National Center of Home Food Preservation has been saying how you can can them in a pressure canner or a water bath canner if you're just doing plain tomatoes. But if you're not going to do plain tomatoes, usually you can use a water bath canner because you can do salsa, tomato sauce, spaghetti sauce on a water bath canner. You can also can meat in with your spaghetti sauce, but if you're canning the meat in it, you'll have to use the pressure canner. But yeah, you can do lots of stuff with tomatoes. And then for dehydrating, this is one of my favorite things I've started doing. So you're gonna want to blanch your tomatoes. I usually take the skin off because the skin can get super tough when you dehydrate them. But just slice them up, lay them out, pop them in the dehydrator, and you can use them for so much. Like I love putting them on pastas. If you just kind of let them simmer in their sauce, they let out some flavor and it's very good. I've also seen a lot of people use them where if you're a big bread maker, like into the sourdough stuff, you can use dried tomato slices as decor, and that looks very cool. You can add them into soups. You can really add them into anything, stir fries. They're very easy to use, I guess. Just throw them anywhere. And then I do have some recipes, which we can probably put them in the chat. All of them are from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. Very good resource. Everything you find on there is safe. But yeah, I mentioned how you can make zucchini pickles. So there's bread and butter pickles, just freezing summer squash, and then zucchini pineapple. And then for the corn, I have just a basic canned corn recipe, a pickled corn relish, and freezing corn. And then with the tomatoes, we kind of got the whole shebang. We have just canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, tomato juice, salsa, and then spaghetti sauce with meat. And that's all I got for you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, the zucchini season. Zucchinis are being hidden anywhere you can possibly drop them.
Yes.
Yeah, and if folks have questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. I'll keep an eye on that. Or you can check out the chat for some of those links, and also for our garden hotline information. As you were going through like all the different ways to preserve food, I was like, oh yep, done that. I've done that one. I should maybe try that one sometime. I did research on sweet corn back when I was in grad school, and so the replicates that were the control or were with labeled chemicals, we could harvest them to eat them. And so there was definitely a couple summers where told my family, it's like, hey, let's go get sweet corn. And I shucked so much corn.
Seems like it never ends sometimes.
Yeah, it was burned out an electric knife cutting it off the cob. Like it was intense, but I will definitely be trying out some more things with my food dehydrator, I think, this year. So
yeah, that's what I've been doing a lot, is you can kind of throw anything in there. So
oh, we got a question for you in the chat. This one's going to be good. All right. So someone's in a Facebook canning group that advocates doing water bath canning for meats. They state it can be, I'm going to guess, water bathed for 3 hours. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's no evidence-based recipe that recommends that. And this has been tested by the USDA many extension centers and these professional labs. And if you cook meat for 3 hours, do you think I just don't think it will be tender enough. And you also don't know if the food is really getting to the correct temperature in the can because meat is so dense. Even if it's in there for 3 hours, you don't know if it's really going to be able to get to the center of the jar and cook the meat fully through to make sure that all these bad pathogens are out. So maybe it cooks it, but there's also no guarantee that there's not going to be these other pathogens that are floating around in there that won't get cooked to the proper temperature. So they do lots of stuff and sometimes they don't get sick, but you never know if you will. So I always say better safe than sorry, and always make sure you're following an evidence-based recipe. But
yeah, I'm definitely in some, have seen, much like some of the like DIY pest control recipes that make it through the internet. This is also an area where, you know, friends don't give friends botulism. And especially too, I remember from like, you know, the Ball Blue Book and stuff, it's like when you're, you know, packing like a quart jar, like, yeah, that stuff can get really, you know, dense in the middle. And I too, you know, I've got a pressure canner and a water bath, and there was a learning curve on the pressure canner. Like my mom taught me how to use it. And so I think those can kind of be seen as a little bit scary, but do you guys offer like classes, or do you guys have like a YouTube playlist on how to, you know, use a pressure canner?
Yep, we offer classes, and we actually have a very good video just right on our SDSU Extension preservation page from one of our old community health field specialists, and she totally shows you how to use a pressure canner safely. But I have one more thing to add to the meat. Because if you're boiling water for 3 hours, there's going to be evaporation, and I feel like even if you have the lid on, it's still going to maybe sneak through the hole. And just running your oven or your stovetop for 3 hours, that's just a long time to boil water. So I don't know. Yeah, I just don't recommend that at all, but
Yeah, and I know we've had some like canning kits at the regional extension centers. Are those still available for people to check out if they want to like try
yes,
canning?
they're available for our master food preservers. So
Okay.
if you love canning and you want to join the program, we have applications and you can reach out. But our volunteers can use those to help teach workshops. So the public can technically use them, but just if they're with one of our volunteers or myself or our other colleague, Whitney Keller. But
Awesome. Yeah, I know we've got a kit here in Pierre, so just figured I'd ask the question about it. We have another one that came in. Does botulism have an odor that you can smell and therefore would not eat the food?
Nope. That's why they're super strict on like what recipes they recommend, because botulism is kind of like the hidden one. You can't smell it, you can't see it. So it's just there because it's a toxin. So no, you can see mold and smell mold and know when stuff spoils, but botulism you can't. So that's why we really push following the evidence-based recipe, because those are proven. If you follow them, they're gonna be safe. So
yeah. Yeah, and also just checking to make sure, like, you know, your canning lid that, you know, didn't pop like during storage, or just some of those things.
Yep.
Too, to make sure that your stuff is still like sealed and all that fun stuff. Yeah, for people who've maybe ever used an autoclave, you know, in science labs or whatever, the heat and the pressure to sterilize soil and stuff, it's same kind of concept, just on your stovetop to sterilize the food that you're keeping for later.
Yes.
But yeah, this is also why I have just like a giant freezer in my basement, because sometimes you get to a point you're like, oh God, I can't can another thing.
I know.
And we did have a hot second there where it was hard to get canning lids. Do you know, how's the canning lid supply going this year?
I think they're good. I haven't heard anything from them. I think that was when COVID-19 was a huge thing, and people were like, they didn't want to go out in public, or they were scared, or people thought there's going to be a food shortage. Lots of reasons. So everyone was canning at home, which is so awesome to grow your own food and can it, because then you know where it came from, you know what's in it. So yeah, I don't know. But no, I think now they're back on track. So you
yeah.
can
Question about electric pressure canners. I know there's been some sort of new technology on the market. Have you tried any of the electric pressure canners?
No. Because the electric pressure canners, I'm not saying they never, like, they won't ever be approved, but right now the USDA still does not approve them. It can be tricky because on the main websites that sell the electric pressure canners, it says follows USDA guidelines, and it makes it look like it's approved, but the USDA themselves has not approved the electric pressure canners. They're still doing testing on it to make sure that it can provide a safe product. So I've not used one, and I won't until the USDA approves it. So.
And another question here. I know household vinegar has some of it, you gotta read those labels, but some of it has gone from 5% acetic acid to 4%. Can you still can with 4%, or how do you do that?
So we actually just posted an article on the SDSU Extension website regarding that, because it just came out that retailers are starting to sell 4% at a lower price. But when it comes to canning, all these recipes are tested based on 5% acidity, and acidity is huge in canning. That's what we keep track of to kill botulinum, Clostridium botulinum. So we recommend to not can with 5% acidity or 4% acidity. Sorry, most recipes require 5% acidity, because it's going to be a safe product, where if you use the lower percent acidity, you don't know if it's going to have enough acid to kill the pathogens. So,
man, we're going to be stockpiling 5% vinegar here. That's going to be the next. Hopefully some of those manufacturers get some feedback and maybe bump that back up, because or at least have like a canning vinegar, something.
Or just make it more noticeable on the label, because it can be hard to find on the label. So
yeah, no, usually that percent is like down there sort of in a corner. And when the people are doing the DIY like herbicide recipes, and they're like, oh yeah, just use household vinegar. And I'm like, guys, it's 5% like at best. Like that is great for canning. That is not going to do anything for killing weeds. Let's see. And there's a couple questions about like the lids not sealing. Any tips or tricks on that?
Yes, so it kind of just depends. Lids aren't totally made like they used to now. I think they're trying to make them with like spending the least amount of money. So I don't know. So the plastic rubber on the outside is thinner than it used to be. So they only say to use the lids one time and then throw them away. You can keep them like if you're going to just store stuff in the cans, but if you're going to use them for canning, only use the lids one time. They do make like a Rattler brand, which those are reusable, but I don't know where you can find them. I think they're just, I don't know if they still make them and if it's just older product. But if you do realize your cans aren't sealing, just a few things you can keep in mind is you always want to make sure you're cleaning the rim of your jar. Like I know if you make jam, that can get messy. So you always want to make sure you're cleaning the rim, because if there's any food particles in the way, it's going to block the seal from sealing. Also, if you don't have the finger band screwed on tight enough, sometimes it doesn't help support the seal, but you also don't want to have the finger band on too tight. So I'm saying finger band, just a band, but you put it on fingertip tight. So twist it on, and as soon as it's giving you too like resistance, you kind of want to lay back, because then it needs room to flow air out and then seal back down. But yeah, or checking your jars to see if there's any nicks, because throughout the years, the jars definitely get some wear and tear to them. So making sure there's no nicks that are allowing air to constantly flow through to not seal it would be a good thing to check too. But
yeah, and if you've got them, if something comes out of the canner and it didn't seal, don't use that lid again, but can you, if you're doing another batch, can you like put it back in with a new lid?
Yep. Just make sure that the lid is, or that the rim of the jar is clean and stuff. So,
yeah. Back on that 4% vinegar, if you're using 4%, can you add more vinegar and less water?
Because you still don't know the correct ratio from acid to water to also the acidity in the whole recipe you're making. So we really encourage to stick to the 5% vinegar. So
Yeah, really the only way that you could like change the percent acidity in your vinegar is if you, bust out the chemistry lab equipment and start distilling it. Like,
Use your pH probe and all this stuff. So
yeah, that's your
mhm.
best bet is to harass your local big box store, or grocery store, or wherever you're getting vinegar, and ask them to please, please, please stock a canning vinegar that
Mhm.
is 5%. There's no amount of kitchen chemistry that is going to get you that extra percent acetic
Mhm.
acid.
Yes. So
Not
mm.
in a way that's verifiable. So good times. There was a comment too about donating extra produce to food pantries. Does your program sort of do any facilitation there? Are there any tips for that, or any places that take donations like that?
I don't know. I know sometimes if you want to donate, I don't know. We don't really do much with that. I feel like maybe our farm to school field specialist. I don't want to say that and then not know, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, we sometimes can do like canning workshops with food that's donated, but
Mhm.
that's kind of all we have to do with that. But
Yeah, and I'd say maybe reach out directly to your local food pantry, because there
mhm,
are sometimes regulations around what they can and cannot accept. As great as it is to donate things, they don't necessarily know what your food production standards were in your backyard.
yeah.
So you may be better off, just donating directly, to your neighbors, or at a community gathering, your book club, everyone goes home with a zucchini.
Yep.
But you can always call some of those local places and see what policies they have around that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, well, if folks have additional food preservation questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. I am going to switch over to sharing my screen and go over a couple fun insect things. So we'll share my screen here. Okay, so starting out with some of the cool insects that I get in my inbox. Called this one Invasion of the Giant Caterpillars. Not so much an actual invasion. These are not occurring in large numbers, but these are very large caterpillars that do get people's attention. They're both, and a lot of these ones I'm getting questions about are all in the sphinx moth family. So the Sphingides, but they can be, thumb size or bigger, especially when people are noticing them. It's when they're finished feeding and they're looking for a place to pupate. Most of their pupation locations are going to be in soil, and then that moth will emerge the next year. And these turn into, our big, white line sphinx, our Akamon sphinx. We have a spurge hawk moth, which is the one pictured on the right. It's very brightly colored, lots of spots. It's got the horn on its butt, and it does eat leafy spurge. So that's kind of handy of it. The one on the left, of course, is our classic tomato hornworm. So once you see them in their thumb size, they have eaten all the tomatoes that they're going to eat. And I personally advocate for just letting them turn into a cool moth, because they are, those sphinx or, hummingbird moths that come out at dusk and feed on like the 4 o'clocks and the morning glories and some of those trumpet shaped flowers. So once they are at this size, they have eaten all the food. I consider it, they won, let them continue their life cycle. But I know some folks will pick them off, especially the tomato hornworms, and, throw them to their chickens or whatever as a tasty snack. But we do have some large caterpillars, and the Akamon sphinx caterpillar, that one likes wild grapes and Virginia creeper. And it looks a lot like a tomato hornworm, except it's very pink, which is kind of a disconcerting color. It's almost like the color of my shirt. And that's a little bit weird for a caterpillar, but they do get a lot of attention when people start to notice them. So if you do have wild grapes or Virginia creeper in your backyard, maybe keep an eye out for the giant pink caterpillars, and keep an eye out for the moths that they turn into. I also had a question today. This picture came through my inbox from one of the garden hotlines, and somebody was having their hostas eaten up by some blister beetles. So I did include the link there of our blister beetle article. We do have a couple different species of blister beetles, and you can kind of see them in this picture. They're a gray beetle. Their head and their thorax are narrower than the abdomen. And actually the thorax, that middle segment, is the narrowest part of the insect. So they kind of have this teardrop shaped abdomen. And like the name suggests, they do cause blisters when handled. These are the same beetles that when they're in alfalfa can harm horses if horses ingest them in their alfalfa hay. So this is a critter that is managed sort of on a field scale if you're an alfalfa producer. But when we see them in gardens, usually they kind of come in, do some chewing, and then go out. And you can see this hosta, like it's looking a little raggedy, but I will say plants that are all leaves can really tank a lot of herbivory damage. So just because they're looking a little rough, you know, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be harmed. You can continue to support them with watering, which is probably the biggest thing in South Dakota. But you know, you may not feel it necessary to try to hit them with an insecticide. If you decide to maybe pick some of them off to like remove them that way, highly recommend wearing gloves, because when they are sort of handled or disturbed, that's when they secrete sort of they ooze blood, the insect blood that contains cantharidin, and that's what causes the allergic reaction in a lot of people. So blister beetles have been sort of around for a while this season, but we do sort of see them sporadically show up in gardens. And especially if you're near an alfalfa field and that alfalfa field has been harvested or mowed, you might be seeing more blister beetles as they move out of that cut alfalfa. So that's something to keep in mind as well. I did want to put in a cool wasp. This is called a cricket hunter. So it's another one of our large solitary ground nesting wasps. Has a very similar life cycle to the cicada killer, only this one, as the name suggests, specializes in crickets. So for all the people that ask me questions about crickets and don't particularly like them, this wasp should be your new best friend. It's a very sort of beautiful blue metallic color with almost black wings, and it's not nearly as big as the cicada killer, maybe only an inch or so long and very slender. So it's not sort of big and chunky like the cicada killer. I usually have one or two that hang out in my backyard every year. This is my current resident cricket hunter, but it is a very cool wasp. And then we've got my my pest control rant of the evening. I was going grocery shopping when I got back from a wedding this weekend, and I noticed that it is hedge ball season. Hedge balls are the fruit of the Osage orange tree. So they're these knobby green, hard fruits that you cannot eat. They are not a fruit that we eat. A lot of things out in nature don't particularly eat them. So they will sort of collect in hedgerows or places where Osage oranges are planted. So much like, if you've got a black walnut in your yard, you step on something, slightly smaller than a tennis ball and round, you can turn your ankle in your lawn. So, people mostly get annoyed by them and pick them up and, toss them that way. And some people are enterprising enough that they are like, well, we'll sell them for pest control. So the label there cracks me up that they're selling this in a produce department and have big giant letters, do not eat. Again, read the label. But the claim is that if you put a couple of these in your basement, that it will repel all manner of things from your basement: spiders, rodents, cockroaches, just everything. And it's not true. They, much like a lot of our sort of botanically derived repellents, you have to take the plant matter and distill it down to extract sort of the active ingredient from the plant material. And so there are some like cool things that you can extract from hedge balls, but an insect repellent is not one of them. I was actually doing some research on this today, and there are people that sort of extract oils from the seeds of the hedge balls and actually use it in cosmetics. So not for insect repellent properties though, just for some, I guess, some cool face oil. I don't even know. But yeah, hedge balls, they're not going to hurt you if you put them out, aside from maybe being a choking hazard for something. But they're also not going to repel any of those critters that I just listed. Many of those things, travel in 3 dimensions like we do. So they're just gonna, fly over the hedge ball barrier. So save your money. If you want to keep critters out of your basement this fall, highly recommend checking those window wells, checking those screens, checking your door sweeps, and doing a lot of that, home maintenance at this point before we get to, September, when things are starting to move indoors, as it inevitably, maybe someday, will get a little bit cooler. So hedge balls, kind of myth busted. Also, don't accidentally think there's some weird sort of like Asian pear and eat them. I don't think they taste good. And then another plug for some of our upcoming events. I know I mentioned these quickly last week when I was presenting from Sioux Falls, but for those of you in the Sioux Falls region, August 19th is Bugapalooza. For those of you in sort of the central-ish part of the state, or who want to make a trip to see the state fair, if you haven't already, at any point previous summers, come join us there. The horticulture building will have talks all 4 days, and then the master gardeners will have a table there to answer your questions and hand out some publications. And then in the Brookings area, we've got Insect Fest at McCrory Gardens on September 9th. So I know we'll have garden hour through the month of August. And then once September hits, garden hour is off the air, but I wanted to get some of these dates on your calendars in case we don't catch you before the end of the season. So let me take a look here real quick. Ooh, we got another canning question in, Claudia. How long are home canned tomatoes good for?
That is a good question. Oh. Okay, I have it on a PowerPoint very close. Well, actually, no. So most canned goods, they say, are good for 12 months, and then you can kind of leeway up to 18 months, but again, use your best judgment. If there's any discoloration or a bad smell, don't eat it. When in doubt, throw it out. But they say kind of like the rule of thumb is 12 to 18 months. Most canned goods are good for, or home canned goods. So.
Yeah, and I think if you go beyond that, you might just sort of, the quality might go down, like especially depending on how you've stored it.
Yep. And if there's been sun exposure or anything. So. Yeah.
Well, yeah. If there's any other questions, get them in now, guys, because it's just me and Claudia. So I don't have a third person to punt to as far as killing some time while you think of questions. But we will be back here next week, and I'm going to take a look real quick at the spreadsheet. It looks like I will be here. Fingers crossed, John Ball will be here. Who knows what his travels are like. And one of our new horticulture faculty, Sean Toporek, will be here as well. So talking about some plant disease stuff. So if you're somebody who's been noticing like powdery mildew or, some other weirdness in your garden, definitely come hang out with us next week. And it looks like the rest of the month we have McCrory Gardens on the 15th, and our sort of final climate update of the summer will be on August 22nd with Laura Edwards. So, and our last episode for the regular season will be August 29th. Let's see what we got in the questions.
You got a question.
Detergent mixture that mostly, is it also bad for bugs? No, don't put that on bugs. There are plenty of what I consider softer touch insecticides for insects, especially if you are trying to manage, spider mites, aphids, some of our softer bodied critters, the horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps are some of those softer touch products that work well for those types of insects. And honestly, considering what people want to use the vinegar for, you wouldn't want to spray that directly on your plants. It's not going to kill the plant, but it's also going to be sort of how you sunburn sunburn your plant or have some foliage, foliar damage. So the soap part in there is like the tiny little bit of, kernel of truth of the surfactant, so it will make the products like coat better. But you can achieve that effect by using the insecticidal soap that is labeled for that purpose. So please don't. I feel like I've perhaps given people the wrong idea with Garden Hour, and they're going to try all of these different DIY remedies. Don't do it. Only use products that have an EPA label on them. So, and let's see, talk about summer squash. So the examples you gave for dealing with zucchini, do the same instructions apply for straight neck squash?
I am no expert on squash, but I'd have to look into that. I know freezing it is the same, but with canning, you usually, unless it says like some recipes call for summer squash, and you should be able to use any squash in there. But I'm not sure about straight neck squash because I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, there's so many different kinds of cucurbits. Like, are you thinking like the question answer, or Michael who asked the question, are you thinking about like the yellow crooknecks or something that's more in like the butternut, like winter squash family?
Yes.
Because we've got,
let me just look this up quick. Because I'm gonna say I think we kind of just call that either summer squash or yellow squash. And you can do like a summer squash relish. There's some recipes for that. But yeah, just kind of like the zucchini, you're always gonna have to add some acid into it to help acidify it to help maintain those pathogens. But
yeah, let's see if we got a follow up. Oh yeah, yes, like a crookneck, but with a straight fruit, otherwise looks like a yellow zucchini.
Yeah, so you can freeze it, but if you are gonna can it, I'd try and look for a specific canning recipe, and it's probably gonna be acidified, so like a relish or a pickled. But
yeah, and just from like the years of growing and consuming squashes, sometimes I find the yellow ones to be a little bit more watery. So maybe too, if you're dehydrating, they might take a little bit longer.
Yes. They kind of get a little weird when you freeze too, because I have one frozen just because I couldn't eat it all. And they get, because like the flesh is so watery that when it thaws, it just kind of,
yeah, it just goes to mush.
Very, very limp. Yeah. But
yeah.
I also didn't blanch it though. So blanching it would probably help maintain its texture, but I just threw it in a bag. So
yeah. Yeah, and I've shredded zucchini before and then frozen the shredded zucchini, and then when I go to use it in like my zucchini bread recipe that's more of like a zucchini like quiche sort of thing, I actually let it thaw and like let it drain before I use it just to get some of that extra moisture out of it. So
otherwise your cake or whatever probably wouldn't set.
Yeah, exactly. It would just be an absolute mess. Yeah, so we've got to get real creative with the zucchini. Let's see, it looks like a question in the chat about mulberries. How do you deal with the fruit flies and black flies with, yeah, so, and as we sort of move into fall, sad about that, slight tear. If you've got fruit trees, so mulberries, plums, apples, anything that's dropping fruit that's not getting picked up, you will absolutely have some different, flies, you'll have wasps, you'll have critters, of the four-legged variety coming to sort of take advantage of that bounty. And really the only way to prevent that is to pick up and dispose of the fallen fruit. This is also really important when managing for some of our different fruit pests, both disease-wise and insect-wise. If you think about spotted winged Drosophila, any of that fallen fruit is a site for the larva to finish developing and to pupate for the next season. So removing those fallen raspberries is really important in making sure you don't have a really big local population of spotted winged Drosophila. And I know if John or Rhoda were here, they'd list off like a bunch of different like tree fruit issues that are, helped by sanitation as the season winds down. So it is, and also just for like stepping on it, like you step on a hard, crab apple or something, and like, again, there goes your ankle. But really, the only way to deal with that is to, rake up or pick up the fallen fruit and, throw it back in the compost pile. So it's just sort of just all back there being dealt with, or, toss it in the garbage. But there's unfortunately not a super easy way to do that. But yeah, we've managed to make it to like 7:50, which I'm honestly very impressed with the two of us. we got almost a full hour with some great food preservation questions. Oh, and a question here about the gray beetles and alfalfa. It depends on what you're doing with the alfalfa. Hold on, let me pull up an article for you. We have our sort of extension field crops team that has been keeping up with the blister beetles, and I will throw a link in here. So yeah, the question with that is, it's like you might need to, depending on sort of what you're doing with the alfalfa, or depending on what you're doing with the alfalfa, you might not need to spray. So definitely check out that article. And Dr. Adam Varenhorst is a great person to ask questions about that, since he handles our sort of more field crop side of things. But yeah, Claudia, any final tips on food preservation for the summer?
Not really. Just make sure you're using the proper ingredients. I will say, because I've been getting questions about this, peppers are peppers. So we always say don't interchange foods, but when it comes to peppers, you can. So if you're following a salsa recipe that calls for jalapenos, but maybe you don't like anything spicy, you can use substitute bell peppers, but just use the same amount. So I guess.
Yeah, because one jalapeno can be a very different size than one one bell pepper. So yeah, that's a good tip. As I think about some of the different peppers, I gotta dig through the weeds to see how they've been doing. I was out of town for a while, so my garden got a little bit out of hand. And yeah, for those of you who have questions sort of over the next week, feel free to submit those either to us directly or through the Ask Extension widget on our Problems and Solutions page, or you can get in touch with one of the garden hotlines in Pierre, Aberdeen, or Rapid City, with your questions. And picture is definitely worth 1,000 words. So if you do have a picture of the problem, that really goes a long way towards helping our garden hotline staff with those answers as well. But thank you everybody for joining us this week. We will be back with you same time next week with a slightly different cast of characters. Thank you, Claudia, for joining us and sharing your expertise about canning and food preservation. And we'll see you all next week. Until then, happy gardening.